Head nods. Okay, cool. They're out on the call, I'm assuming? Okay. Yeah, we've had some issues. We met with Fire District 6 here in December last year, and it was amazing. Every once in a while you get a call and the guys leave, half the room leaves, and you get everybody else stay. But we do the best we can as we go through today. So good morning, everyone. Glad to see everybody here, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. I'm Michael Getman. This is Gene Morris. We are collectively the safety manager for Clark Public Utility. And the reason that is because I retire at the end of this month. So out with the old, in with the new. So between us, we have about 73 years of experience in the utility. So if it's happened out there, we've probably seen it. So hopefully you have some questions today, and we can get through those. And if for some reason we don't have an answer to your question, we'll certainly get back to you with that information. So just a little bit on myself. I've been in the industry a total of about 44 and a half years, and done a lot of different things in different places. 3 utilities in the state of Washington, 1 in Connecticut, transmission, distribution, substation work, etc. I've been in the office for a number of years too, as safety manager here at Clark for about 9.5 years now. So I'll let Gene give you some of his experience.
Well, good morning. As he said, I'm Gene Morris. I'll be the new safety manager at Clark PUD. So we'll probably be seeing each other for the next 10, 15 years since I don't have 2 weeks until I retire. I've got 29 years in the industry. I'm a journeyman lineman. That's my background. I've worked in the construction side, the contracting side of the business, and then also for Pacific Corps, which is right across the river, before I joined Clark PUD 2 years ago. Between the two of us, we've got a lot of ideas that go out there, and we try to give you guys the best information possible from our experiences and what you can do when you come across an accident scene that involves, something from our system. And hopefully today, this is interactive, so you guys jump in, ask questions whenever you want to. We know, like Michael said, we know you might be in and out and get calls and things like that, and that's fine. But feel free to follow up with this at a later date if you have more questions, or we'll come back down and have another talk with you. But we hope you learned a little bit about power lines and the safety around power lines and what you do in your industry, because we kind of depend on each other to make the right calls when we're out there on the job.
So we appreciate being here, and I'm not sure what prompted our being here, but we're very glad to be here. And as Gene said, we're welcome. We're more than happy to come back at any time and talk about anything. Up here on the table, we have samples of just about every size and shape of wire that we have within the system, whether it be underground primary wire, overhead primary wire, secondary wire for underground, overhead secondary wire. We'll talk about these a little bit more as we get through the presentation. But these are the only pieces of wire we want you to pick up, period. Out there on the job and something's laying on the ground, we're going to repeat things a number of times through the presentation to make sure that we're hitting home with the message of staying away from live wires, staying away from any wire until we tell you it's okay to deal with it, okay? So agree or not, this is the direction we'd like to go. It is for your safety, because what is it when you come upon an accident scene or any incident scene, what is the first thing you want to do? Make scene safety, right? The thing is that you don't know that wire's dead or alive, you need to stay away from it, because we're not there yet, okay? So we'll get into the presentation here. So in the state of Washington, as workers, you cannot get any closer, as an unqualified worker, you may not get any closer than 10 feet to any one of our power lines, period. 10 feet, okay? That's when they're in position. When they're on the ground, it's a different story, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But lines over 50 kV, which we have some transmission lines in the system that are over that voltage, you need to stay back a little further, okay? So, again, our presentation here we've done for a number of different organizations. We're firefighters, police, we're EMTs. We want you to be safe. Give us an opportunity to do our job so that you can do your job and do it safely. So we're going to talk about electricity and the basics, the electrical system, how it interacts with you, anatomy of the electrical shock, and responding to injuries. So how many EMTs in the group we have? Everybody? No, like quite a few? Yeah, okay. So, all right. All right, so a few electrical basics. First question we have today, this is to kind of wake everybody up here. So audience participation time. Electricity is always trying to get to ground. Okay, and we'll take the path of least resistance. In electrical accidents, this path is often through people. Yeah, somebody's body, right? Okay, and that's the bad part about the whole thing. So, electricity in the human body, we want to talk about this. The body is mostly water, as you already know. It's an excellent conductor of electricity. Really great. Body can be a path where electricity seeks, it's always seeking its lowest potential for earth ground. And as you get into the effects on the body, these are the levels where you're going to start seeing issues. You get 3 milliamps or more, you get a painful shock. 10 milliamps or more, you've got muscle contraction, you can't let go. And again, we're going to talk about that a little bit more to give you an idea how that really works, if you haven't already seen that. 3 milliamps or 30 milliamps or more, lung paralysis, it's usually temporary. And then you get into 50 milliamps or more, possible ventricular fibrillation, that usually is fatal. You get into 100 milliamps to 4 amps, and certain ventricular fibrillation, and it is fatal. 4 amps or more, you've got heart paralysis, severe burns on top of being dead. Okay, so types of emergencies you're going to run into, and I'm sure you can add to this list, but these are just a few we put up here: structure fires, car pole accidents, substation problems, down wires, electrical contact, and any others. And these are ones we're all going to cover all of these here today. All right. So again, any questions, any comments, or anything, just shout them out. We'll get to them. So responding to an emergency involving electrical facilities. So you want to be prepared. You want to be aware of what's out there. You want to be alert. A lot of times these accidents are going to be in the evening. It's going to be dark. It's going to be raining. It's going to be windy. There's going to be a lot of things that you're going to want to look for, on top of the fact that you're responding to a problem that's out there already. Electricity is quietly efficient. And we'll demonstrate that. We'll show that in some pictures and some discussion as we go through. Don't take anything for granted when you're out there, and I'm sure you've already had that in your training, but when you're coming upon an accident that has our facility involved, don't take anything for granted. Never underestimate the potential dangers that are out there. Variables, human error. OSHA says what? 90+% of the accidents and injuries that happen out there are attributed to human error. Okay? So you have to be aware. You really don't want to make a mistake when it comes to dealing with our systems, electricity. You have adverse weather conditions, as we already talked about. So we don't want you to attempt to move a down wire, ever. Okay? If we've come in and we've cleared the wire and the wire's laying on the ground and they've cut both ends off and they say, yeah, it's okay, fine. But until we get in there and we give the okay, stay away from it, leave it alone. Disconnected, we don't want you to disconnect the electrical service. We don't want you to enter substations. So some simple guidelines. We want you to, as you've already been trained to do in a lot of situations, assess the problem. You want to secure the area. You want to make sure somebody isn't getting into that. We're going to have a little video on that to kind of demonstrate some of that also, that what you're going to want to do when you get to an accident scene involving our facilities. You want to immediately give us a call. We have people that are on call, of course, 24 hours a day, but our service crews run, what, 7 in the morning till midnight? Yep. 7 days a week. So we have somebody that can respond pretty darn quick. So again, this is another one of those things we're talking about, and we're going to keep hammering this. Don't touch a down power line. And you got to expect the unexpected. Accident scene assessment before you leave your vehicle. You want to look up, because you want to make sure that you're going to stay alive in that thing. It's like we talked about, making the scene safe. You get on the scene, you want to make sure you're aware of all of the hazards that are out there. You do your hazard assessment real quick. You make sure you're not becoming part of the accident, of the incident. Don't park under or near power lines, and we'll give you a really good example later on why we don't want you to park under or near power lines, especially car pole accidents, that type of thing. There's a lot of different things that can happen, And we don't want any of those to happen to you folks. So once you leave your vehicle, be aware of underground power lines. You know, we do have overhead and underground power lines. If you're driving into the area and you don't see any utility poles anywhere or anything, you know, you got to be aware that there are facilities in there someplace. There's been a number of times when there's vehicles that ended up on top of transformers, on top of switchgear, on top of secondary pedestals, and you would never know. So you kind of have to be aware, you have to be watching for those things. Smoke and steam can conduct electricity. Never place ladders near your power lines. I'm sure some of this stuff you've already had in your trainings, but we're just trying to reinforce these things. Aluminum ladders, magnesium ladders, really not a good thing to be around power lines. I'm assuming you have fiberglass ladders in some instances. No, you have metal ladders. Aluminum ladders, yeah. That's certainly not something you want near our power lines. So you want to watch and listen. A lot of times you can tell that there is a problem. You can hear an arcing. You can hear it hissing, a sizzling. It'll give you an indication that something is not right. Something is out of the ordinary. Never pull a meter to disconnect power. Those are things that we can do safely. And believe it or not, pulling a meter doesn't always shut the power off. We have a lot of instances where we have higher roads and higher commercial installations where you pull the meter and everything's going to keep on humming. Okay, so those things are just certainly not anything we want you to do. You haven't had the training, you don't have the PPE available in order to do that safely. So never leap or crawl near down power lines. Gene, did you want to throw something in there on that?
I think when you talk about the smoke and steam, one of the things I ran into a long time ago, I was working in Walla Walla, Washington in a snowstorm, and we came up across this to put this line back up, way up in the middle of nowhere. It's in the backwoods. It's just a single phase line going through there. And I'm walking up the road, and the road's steaming. There's like 15 inches of snow on the ground, and I'm thinking, what the heck's going on here? Anyway, I brushed the snow aside, and the asphalt's just sitting there bubbling. And what had happened is the tree came down through the line, hit the asphalt, went through the snow, hit the asphalt, and then it wasn't enough fault current to make the fuse open behind us. And what it did is it just melted right down into the asphalt and was sitting there just boiling the asphalt. And that whole time, that line had been down for probably a day, day and a half. It was sitting there burning into that asphalt. It was still live. So when you come up upon a scene, say when it's snowy weather, rain, whatever, look for that steam on the ground too, because that's a pretty good indication that that line could still be hot while it's laying on the ground. There's just sometimes it doesn't, you know, create enough fault current to either open up the switch or the fuse or anything behind it. It just depends on you almost got to have exact ground conditions. But the one thing I will tell you is snow is a damn good insulator. A power line can lay in the snow for a long time and not even be affected. So you just want to look for those signs.
And pretty good indication of that too. I don't know if you happen to see this. Is a couple of years ago now, they had a Channel 8 news crew, KGW news crew over in Portland, reporting on an incident where there's a down power line behind a vehicle, and you could see the arcing in that. And they were trying to film it and talk through what was happening, and you had some first responders come on there, and we had some very interesting firefighters from that side of the river that decided they were going to throw water on that thing. And then the ensuing explosion really lit up the whole screen. Everything went white and that, and everybody was backing off on that. And the line still stayed energized. So, you know, we're going to talk about that, but, you know, one of the things is you do not want to be throwing water onto an energized power line. It just doesn't work very well, okay? And we'll talk more about that as we go through. So again, with accident scene assessment or continuing, you want to maintain your proper clearances away from our facilities. We'll talk about those distances as we go through. Watch out for induced voltages. And then also, communication wires, fences, and poles all can become energized. Did you know that? You get a power line laying down across a fence, across a guardrail, and those things can become just as energized as that wire is.
Yeah, and you got to remember, if they're traveling 2 miles down the road, that electricity's traveling with it 2 miles down the road.
Yeah, we had a windstorm here beginning of 2016. We had our tree trimming crews out going into an area to try to remove some trees so that our crews could come in and put the facilities back up. And they did a scene assessment, and they saw one of the wires that was still energized laying on a guardrail. So they blocked off the whole street on both ends until we could get a crew in there to shut the power off. So, hey, you just never know. But again, scene assessment, looking for the hazards and mitigating those issues, okay? Keeping yourself safe. So, what do you think? Pretty good, huh?
Who said done that?
Okay. Energized fence, we just kind of talked about that, okay? It can happen. Obviously, this isn't an AC current here, because if you notice the way this guy went in there and he put both hands on there, if that's AC, guess what? Not letting go. You're going to stay there until it either blows you off or the power goes off. Okay, DC pulsating current here for the livestock fence or whatever, and the ladies thought that was really fun, by the way, if you notice that, which it is. I mean, Gene, you've got to...
Yeah, that happened to me one time. We were doing a job, and this goes back to how things can be energized for a long distance. And I had this foreman, and I know probably you've all run into this guy before, who just rides you into the ground. Screaming and yelling, you just can never, especially when you're brand new, you can never do good enough for him. And, is this him? Apparently you're the one.
Is that why he's the AV guy now, or what?
You're the guy we're picking on today then, I guess. So I think that one of the things that happened is we pulled up on this job. We had to change this pole out at this guy's property. It was, so we went and de-energized the line so we could just take everything apart, put the new pole in, put the new transformer in, so there's an electric fence sitting right there. And somebody had said, watch out for the electric fence, and of course the foreman turned around, God damn it, I'm the foreman here. We just turned the power off, the fence ain't hot. And he walked over and grabbed it. It was the neighbor's electric fence. So he got a shock of his life, and of course I was on the ground just with tears in my eyes rolling around laughing. But it gives you a good example of you can't take it for granted type situation. But that was a perfect thing, and the house that actually energized the fence was about a quarter mile across the field. Wow. And so we're standing there working around that thing all day hot, and he decides to go over and grab it, so it was pretty good. You kind of like it when that happens to a guy like that, so because he's always trying to educate you, and now he just got educated.
Yeah. So, additional action to scene assessment tips here. Ensure the safety of rescuers and bystanders. And again, you want to make the scene safe for yourself going in there and anybody else after you. Bystanders too, we're going to have another example of that in a video that we'll show you here in a bit. Barricade the area, block it off. Believe it or not, we have had scenes where our guys are out there working, wires are laying on the ground, they're trying to control traffic and people are driving around them. You know, barricade it off, stop it, block people from going in there. A lot of times people really feel that the things that they have to do are more important than living sometimes. I know we've been very fortunate we haven't had any issues, but it certainly can change in an instant, in a flash, and no pun intended, and then the whole life changes really quickly. So, post a safety watch. Make sure there's somebody there if you have to leave the scene. Make sure there's somebody there, making sure you've called us, that we're aware of what's going on out there. So, and then contact the utility again. Just make sure that I can't talk enough about the communication that we need between you folks out there and us. And there's always an opportunity. Our foremen have cell phones. There's always an opportunity for a direct communication between the crew in the field and the crew that's responding. And so you can ask for that, because sometimes it gets a little cumbersome going through your dispatch center, 911 call center, and then going through our dispatch center and then doing that communication. If you feel you need more information, ask them for a phone number so you can talk directly to the people that are on the scene. Okay? So with down wires, we certainly have causes or weather conditions. We talked about vehicle accidents, equipment failure once in a while. We've got a pretty darn good system here. We're upgrading it all the time, but every once in a while we do get a piece of equipment that will fail, and that certainly can cause an issue here with the down wire. So some of the dangers, of course, you're going to have live wires laying on the ground, backfeed from external sources, whether it be an external generator or a wind generator or a solar panel or something. There's always an opportunity for that backfeed. So, and then you have step potential, and we'll get in and we'll talk about that. Has anybody ever heard that term before? Step potential? Touch potential? No? Okay, cool. Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit here too. So we want you to expect the unexpected again. You just have to make sure that you're looking for everything. And many eyes working together makes for a better situation. Everybody out there on guard for what's happening. Call the utility. Again, let us know what you've got out there. Let us know what's going to happen. Treat all down wires as energized. Can you tell the difference between a phone cable and a power line? Between a communications Comcast cable and a power line? Very difficult to do that. Especially when there's all kinds of wires laying around, you don't know which one's which. So it's just easiest for you to stay away from everything altogether. So we constantly get calls from waste control. They're always hitting something somewhere. And if it ends up on top of the truck, their people have been informed just to stay in the truck, give their dispatcher a call, we respond out there. And it may be a lot of times it is a communications cable of some type, but we don't want them taking chances. That's what our job is, to go out there and make that identification.
Yeah, and you can take a look at one of our conductors right here. Actually, that's an underground. This is what we call tree wire. It's not an insulation, it's actually a protective coating, because since we have a lot of lines that run back through trees and things like that, we'll get branches and whatnot that fall down onto the power lines. This way the tree doesn't just sit there and burn and kind of this another fire, the limb will just sit there forever. But you can take a look at that, it looks just like a phone cable, you know, like about a 200 pair phone cable. So when these are laying on the ground, that's why we want you to just treat every cable the same until we can come out and make an assessment and make the scene safe for you. But that's a perfect example of a piece of our conductor that is not insulated. You can still get a shock off this thing if you grab it, but it's just enough to protect the lines and the feeders from the trees.
And I encourage you at some point before you leave today is come on up and take a look at these pieces of wire, pick them up, handle them, whatever you'd like, because again, these are the only wire that we want you to touch.
The ones on this table.
The ones on this table, right, okay. These short lengths, okay, all right. So, survey and secure the scene, which we've talked about a lot. Don't park or stand under overhead wires. We're going to go into that again a little more. And again, repeating some of these things that we really need you to remember. And never attempt to touch or move a down wire, and protect the public, okay? So, utility response in an emergency, we are qualified electrical workers. We are the only ones who are going to be able to make that determination whether that line is energized or not. And we can tell you to go to work then when we make the scene safe. All right, so qualified line workers, we can turn the power off to a line. We can ground and disconnect the line for your protection, or disconnect it totally so there's no source anywhere and it's laying on the ground, or issue a clearance if that's necessary in order to do your work. So, you know, we were talking about ladders and that a little bit earlier. Do you have a aerial ladder off of the truck? No, nothing like that. But in instances where departments do have that, that's another issue you have to be careful of, because if you got overhead lines in the area, you go put that ladder up, that can certainly cause some other issues. Did you have something on that?
Yeah, and I'll talk about this a little more when we get into the step potential, but there are times, I've been in an instance before with the fire department on a great big warehouse fire. And the interesting thing is, I mean, this is a huge fire. You got everybody standing down the street watching it. Police won't let us in, so we can't get in to de-energize the circuit. The fire department lifted their ladder truck right up into the primary that fed that facility. They were trying to fight the fire. 6 firefighters on the ground got step potential through their legs and had to be taken to the hospital because they boomed that up in there. So one of the things we'll do is we push the police departments. Our guys show up and we got a fire. You need to let us in. And when you guys are out there, you need to make sure you communicate to the police that when the utility company shows up, you need to let them through so that we can de-energize those lines for you. At that time, they wouldn't let us in. And our serviceman, this was when I worked for another company, but our serviceman is on the radio to dispatch, screaming at them, just shut the whole thing off, because they had SCADA controls of the substation that fed that area. Well, by then, when the ladder truck reached up, hit the line, it burnt in two, the wire fell to the ground, hit the ground, of course the ground's soaking wet, all the firefighters got step potential, and then the wire headed right for the crowd that was standing on the sidewalk across the street. So we had a live wire heading across there, and what saved everybody that day is the wire went across a couple of railroad tracks, which created enough fault current to open up the feeder. So that could have been a whole nother disaster there if that line would have went into that crowd. So we'll talk about the step potential of that, but kind of think about that scene right there, what's going on, and all the things that are happening when we get to that.
And it could very well be, you don't need to have one of those power operated ladders. It could be somebody carrying a ladder. Okay, with the ladder out. And you just, again, watching the scene assessment, making sure you know what's up in the air, and then do what's necessary to keep you and everybody else safe that's on that side. So, in a matter of life and death, when an individual has to exit a vehicle, what method is the safest?
Shuffle.
Jump. Shuffle, okay. I heard jump, I heard shuffle. Anybody else? Yep. Yep. How about cleanly with both feet together, avoiding contact with the vehicle, and then you're going to want to shuffle away or hop away. Okay. But then let's think about that. Okay. Somebody's in a vehicle that just had an accident. It's a carpool, and that person is from here to the exit from you, and you don't know whether that wire is energized or not. If the car's on fire, the people are going to want to get out, and you're going to want to get them out. But you're going to have to talk to that person from a distance, because we're going to want to keep you a distance away from that because of what Gene was talking about, the step potential. Okay? So you're going to get that person out of the car. They're going to have to be a little more clear-headed and understanding airbag just went off, the seatbelt's giving them a jerk. They've hit a pole, they've hit a tree, or whatever the case is, and that wire's laying down. They got to get out of the car. So they're going to have to open up the door, staying on the car itself, and then jump clear of the car without falling back to touch the car, the door, or anything else, and then shuffle their feet close together until they get 30 feet away. Okay. Hopping would be great, but after you've just been through that kind of a trauma, is that person stable enough to hop? Because what will happen is if they do fall, then they're going to be across that ground gradient that we'll talk about on the ground. Causes the problem, causes the step potential that Gene mentioned. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. But again, yes?
I had a question about on the poles. A lot of times you see like a plastic conduit coming down the side of the pole. Do those frequently have hot lines in them?
Mm-hmm.
So if a car even just lightly hits a pole, they're going to break that conduit, probably. You know,
Good.
and
Mm-hmm.
that could energize a car.
Yeah, if it's
Is
still
that
on.
right? Or,
Yeah.
This is the type of wire that would be contained in one of those conduits. This is an underground. This one here, or this one here. It's the same voltage, it's just more, one carries more current than the other. Okay. And it does have an insulation value on the outside of it because it is considered an underground cable, but you don't know. You don't know the condition of that wire. As you said, the pipe is broken.
right.
You don't know what the condition of that is inside. So it can very easily have it energized. Okay. Was there another question? No? Okay, so that makes sense, making sure you get out. But again, the hard part for you, let's face it, I mean, you want to go in and you want to take care of these people, you want to help them, you want to put the fire out, whatever the case might be. But the hardest part for you is going to be standing here and talking to that person that distance away, because you don't know if you go that direction, you're going to have a problem. Okay? And to be perfectly frank with you, and I've said this before, maybe I'm not real popular about it, but that's not my problem. It's not your problem. It's the person that's in the car. It can't become your problem. You have to make that scene safe for you and for everybody else after that. You want to do what you can within reason, without becoming part of the issue, without you being injured. Okay? Let's see, some folks maybe don't agree with me on that, but that's okay. Down power lines. This is one that happened here in the county. Here's one of our servicemen's trucks. And you can see where we have the down line laying on the ground. You can see where it's burned into the ground. Oh, what happened here? Why wouldn't that burn? Interesting, huh? That line was energized when it came down. You would think that that line would be burning into the ground all the way through. This isn't here, not through here, not there. You can't tell from looking at that whether or not that line is energized. Here's a good example of some of the things we were talking about already. This is a crane truck that's into a power line, and this power line is looking at this as additional load. It's heat pumps, it's freezers, it's motors, it's whatever, lighting. It's not enough volt current, as Gino mentioned before, to take the circuit out of service.
As you watch this, you can see this entire truck's energized at whatever voltage this particular utility uses. And you'll see the arc kind of travel back and forth, and all that's doing is it's trying to find a place to ground. It's trying to find the best path to ground, just like on anything else. And that's why you see the arcing and sparking through there.
You see those people to the right? Right up underneath the power line. We talked about making the scene safe for bystanders and for everybody else. Somebody should be getting those people out of here, because if that line separates because of that crane in contact with it, there's a bigger problem coming. This is a really good example of electricity going to ground any place it can. It's not discriminating between paths. Any path that you can take it on, that's where it's going to go.
Well, yeah, I'm saying that all the block.
What do you think that crane operator's saying right now? Should I call the boss?
Former crane operator.
Should I call the boss or should I not call the boss?
When's the last time I smoked one?
You would be surprised. We do these similar presentations for contractors, construction companies and stuff all the time. And you'd be surprised at how arrogant some of their people are.
Yeah.
They actually think that, well, I don't have to maintain 10 feet, I got shit to do. You guys are slowing me down, costing me money. How much do you think that cost him? And how slow do you think that shut down his day? You know, I mean, we've got an operator we're dealing with in Vancouver that works for a company. The scene before with the service truck and the wire laying on the ground, he raised his hand and said, yeah, I burnt that one down in class. And then tried to go along telling me that the electricity jumped off that wire, jumped through the air 2 or 3 feet onto his track hoe, and that's how it got burnt down. And I said, well, that's funny because you were supposed to be 10 feet away. And electricity don't jump the air. So that's an old wives' tale, but we go through this all the time with contractors, and we'll be driving down the road, one of our crews or something, they'll call us and say, we got a crane 3 feet from our line. And you think a big crane, like say a 50-ton or something, those things are what, $500,000, $750,000 piece of machinery? And even if it touches that and it doesn't burn the thing to the ground, Is that electricity is traveling all through that crane, it's burning up electronics, it's burning up bearings, it's burning up anything that an arc jumps, it'll destroy in seconds. So we deal with that a lot.
So again, looking at that scene, and the big thing was, the big show was the truck on fire. And to be honest with you, we don't know whether or not anybody was injured in that. The person got off, but that's another example where you got a vehicle fire, the person has to get off of that truck. The same type of thing we were talking about before is you're jumping clear of that vehicle, landing with both feet as close as you can together, and shuffling away around. But if you look at the ground over there, hopping is not going to be a real big consideration because you've got uneven ground. Even shuffling is going to be a little more difficult, but you've got a better opportunity, which we'll talk about more in the step potential, of staying safe by shuffling than you are with hopping at that. But again, accident scene assessment and keeping the public safe. You saw where the crane was attached to the power line, the boom was up in the air, the crane was coming down, and then you saw people standing underneath the power line. Well, that's another area, again, where you could have a problem if that line separates. So the thing would be is to make sure people are back away from that and across the street, away from that whole scene. The big show is the truck burning, but you can't forget about the wires that are above the head. Okay. So, why can birds perch on a light power line without getting killed? We had not touching two, what did you say?
2 wires.
2 wires. What other answers do we have?
Ground.
Not touching ground, okay. Anything else?
Magic.
Magic?
Rules aren't that liquid.
No, they aren't. There's no difference in potential. We'll talk about that. 2 different potentials, whether it be 2 lines, whether it be a power line and a ground. We're at 2 different levels, 2 different potentials, and that's why they can't. They'll land in a power line, stay safe the whole time. Of course, you don't see any of the birds landing on the 500 kV lines in Bonneville or some of the other 230 lines and stuff. But our distribution lines, they land on them all the time, right? And they're safe, providing they don't get into a different potential. So, can a power line that has been disconnected from the power source kill or injure you? I had a head shaking back there. Says yes, yes. Okay, sure. Induced voltage.
So I'll kind of go through this real quick. I'll use the chalkboard. A couple of things when we're talking about step and touch potential and why birds can sit on a power line. Same potential is really what this is all about. When you shuffle your feet and you're trying to get out of that situation, you're keeping your feet really close together. So everybody knows, so this is Bonneville Dam. It generates electricity, goes into a substation, that gets stepped up to a higher voltage, say 115 kV or 500 kV, whatever the case is. Dams produce electricity at about 13,000 volts, so they don't have, it's not as big as what you think. It goes through, goes into another substation, goes through, goes into a house, through a distribution system. This is like 7,200 volts. And then, where do you think it goes once it gets into your house? It goes right back through the ground. Back there, so there is your electrical circuit. Now, when we're talking about induced voltages and step and touch potential, what happens in each one of these locations is we've got grounds creating all new circuits. In every point of this, from a house here, and that's what happens when you get into a step potential situation. The line goes down, hits the ground, and it creates a gradient, just like throwing a rock into a pond, just like that. And what this is say 7,200 volts here, and as you get away from it, you get out to 0 volts. Ground conditions, wet or dry, snow, whatever the case may be, defines electrically how far that gradient from that point is going to go. So if you walk into that situation, and this is why we say 30 feet, because that's pretty good indication that it's not going to be beyond that. So if you think about it, you walk onto a ground gradient that you can't see, what's happening every time you take a step? If you think about how electricity travels.
You're getting farther away, so it's less voltage there.
What happens is
They're creating 2 points. between.
Yeah, as you get closer to the car, you're gonna pick up higher voltage, but every time you take a step, what's happening? You're creating a brand new circuit. And that's what happened to the firefighters I told you about before. They're on the ground, ground's wet, wire hits the ground, energizes the ground for whatever, how large that ground gradient was. And they're standing out there with their feet apart, and they're basically getting a brand new electrical circuit every time they took a step. So that's how basically electricity works. It has to, anytime you open this circuit, whether it's a ground wire or an energized wire, a ground wire will now become energized because you open the circuit. And that's what happens when you think, you're working on your house and you grab that neutral wire, and then you touch something else and you get shocked and you're going, wait a minute, that's supposed to be the ground wire. That's because you just became part of the circuit. Same thing with like a light bulb, a filament. The electricity goes through a light bulb, and basically a filament's just a coil of wire. There's some engineer way smarter than me figured out that if we put the right voltage to this coil of wire, it lights up and it becomes bright. On the other end of this thing, it's just a dead cord. It's going directly to ground. So you have to remember that electricity, when you talk about voltage, that's electrical pressure. And it kind of acts like water. It's got electrical pressure, and then you got amperage, which is electrical heat. That's what kills you. And then you got ohms or resistance. That's kind of what the electrical pressure is fighting against. So when it hits a resistor, it creates heat. And you become a resistor, and that's why it creates heat. The induced voltages is a completely different thing. And we use this every day in electrical circuits. And you have probably seen this before, because if you've ever been around, say Bonneville's lines, lots of power there, 500 kV lines. Maybe you parked your truck or something under it, you went over and you grabbed the door handle and it shocked you. That's because your truck's being induced. So you take a look at a transformer. One of our transformers, they all work the same. So you have 7,000 volts coming into a transformer, it goes into a coil of wire, it comes out and gets grounded. And then on the secondary side, so say your 120, 240 volt side, comes into two different coils of wire, so that you can get 240 volts across here, or 120 volts, here's your ground, across here. So that's basically what we feed a house with. Any transformer that we use, doesn't matter what voltage, how big it is, this is how it works. So how do you think the electricity gets from the coil of wire up here on the high side of a transformer down to the coil of wire down there? You think there's a connection? There is no connection. This is an air gap. And what happens is when this electricity comes through here and it's grounded on this other side, it creates an electromagnetic field that induces voltage through the air onto the coil below it. So, induced voltages are basically from a system that can create enough electromagnetic current that it actually induces voltage onto something beside it, another conductor. Does that make sense? So big power lines, we got to take extra care. When we're working in corridors with like Bonneville's lines and stuff, our lines, even though we de-energize them and ground them, Bonneville's line, if it's running full bore, it can actually induce enough voltage where it makes it hazardous to work on our line that's already grounded. So that's pretty much how the induction system works. But we use it every day in a transformer. The transformers have absolutely no physical connection between those coils. It's all induced onto it through an electromagnetic field.
And so just to tag on to a little bit what Gene was telling you about this and the induced voltage and that, I was working in Connecticut in a railroad right-of-way. We had 215 kV lines on a separate tower, and I think there was 3 or 4 11,000 volt DC lines in the same corridor. Well, our job this particular day was to go up and make dead ends on this new conductor we had just pulled in. And we had a ground that we used for personal protection, was about this far from the end of the wire that I was working. And the guy on the other side, we had to connect, had a ground about that far from where he was. Well, we went to try to put the wires together, we still drew an arc between the two, trying to put this thing together with the induced voltage. I mean, the line's dead, but this induced voltage. So I took the tail of the wire and I etched my name in the steel. And then we ended up putting our rubber gloves on, our high voltage rubber gloves on, we made the connection, and then we went from there. But that's how the induced voltage can be. And then we have personal protective grounds to keep us from getting in trouble. And that far away from the end still wasn't doing any good. That much induced voltage in that particular quarter. So it can be very nasty. So imagine not having any protection whatsoever and getting into that. So same thing as hitting just a regular energized down power. So, okay. Oh, there we go. Let's go back. Come on. All right.
So this will give you an idea of some of the work that we do, not at Clark, but some of our cohorts out there are Pud on a wire. Who came up with this?
Put me outside. That's where I want to be. On a magic carpet. Back in the late 1800s, there was a gentleman by the name of Michael Faraday. He had a theory that if you enclosed a man in a metal cage and energized that cage at whatever voltage, the man would still live. The voltage would flow around him. I wear a hot suit. It's 75% Nomex for fire retardant and 25% stainless steel thread. And that metal thread means I have a Faraday cage around me. 500,000 volts pass over my body, but I can work without interference from the electricity. As long as the helicopter is isolated from ground, we have the ability to bring ourselves to the same voltage potential as the line, like a bird on a wire. Our pilots are very smooth. It's like they can read our every thought.
Like
There's
fun,
such a
huh?
hunger for electricity these days. Nobody wants to take lines out of service just to maintain them. I've had many people ask me, do you think what you do is safe? And I say, well, in our operation, everything that we do, every move that we make is thought of and rehearsed before, so it's as safe as crossing the street. It's not a job for a hot dog. There's only 3 things I've ever been afraid of. Electricity, heights, and women. And I'm married too.
So you can see that there are times when we can go out, we work live energized stuff like that. The bird on the wire effect, can you imagine? This was actually thought of back in the 80s, and I can remember it was a helicopter company out of Florida. And can you imagine what they were thinking the first time they did that? The first lineman that sat on the side of a chopper and said, I wonder if this is actually going to work. And, you know, pretty soon once they started doing it. Yeah, but you got an engineer's net. Yeah, I better
A
believe.
scientist told me.
Yeah, I better believe the engineer on this.
Maybe you're Bill Nye.
But the reality is, you know, we do that work all the time, and you see the arc. That arc is actually created by the difference of potential from the 500 AC line and the static that a helicopter develops. I don't know if you guys have ever worked around life flight, they talk to you about the static of a helicopter. That's where that arc is developed, and one of the reasons he's not getting like electrocuted there, because there's not enough energy there that creates any amperage. It's just static. It's just like when you shuffle across the floor and grab your doorknob at your house, it gives you a little shock. Same thing, but these guys